Let's talk draft. We're going to do it once again, as I said in previous episodes, that we are going to be focusing on the NBA draft for the next few weeks, which makes a lot of sense for dynasty leagues. The NBA finals are still going on, but for dynasty managers, we're still enjoying that. We're still enjoying the NBA finals, high-level basketball, yada, yada, yada. But our focus is already that we're looking ahead to get an advantage in our dynasty league. So we're going to be back talking more 2025 draft prospects with the guys from Angle Fantasy Basketball. Excited to dive into a few players that they really like, or I guess feel strongly about one way or the other. We'll find out. I don't know yet. And they always do a good job of choosing players that I'm not super familiar with, or maybe I've heard the name, and it makes me do more research. So I always appreciate when they do it. It's a joke now that I think they do it on purpose. I think they try and find guys that my first thought is like, who? And then when I look, I'm like, okay, like that guy. So somebody that I'm not super familiar with, which is great. Works out well for me, makes me do my research. So shout out to them. Excited to get into this conversation with them. But before we do that, just wanted to remind you guys that Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. We've got baseball season in full swing. We're deep into the NBA and NHL finals, and Bet Online has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. I have the opportunity to take advantage of that tonight. If recording this Wednesday night, it won't come out till Thursday, but recording it during Game 3 of the NBA Finals. So it's a great opportunity for me, if I lived in a state that had it, to do some live in-game betting using Bet Online. They have the odds right here. I'm able to pull them up here. Right now, before the game starts, OKC's favored by 5.5 points, and they're still heavy favorites in the series. By the time you listen to this, we'll know if those were good bets or not. And depending on the way this game goes, maybe it gets to a point where OKC's up 15 or Indiana's up 15, and you're like, I just don't think they hold on to this. I really think the other team's going to come back. It's a great opportunity to look at that line and say, could make good money if I bet on the comeback right here. It's a great opportunity for that. We also keep the dog days of summer rolling with the largest selection of odds on everything, with updated odds on the MLB, UFC and boxing, to tennis and NFL futures. BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info. And then in between the games, you can head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and a live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, and we're going to welcome in Mitchell and Andrew from Angle Fantasy Basketball. You can find them on Twitter at AngleFantasyBB. I think this is Andrew. This is your second time on this show, and Mitchell, your first time. This is not obviously the first time we've done podcasts together. We've already done a bunch of them, but for this show specifically, welcome Mitchell, first time on, and welcome back, Andrew. Before we get into talking about some of the specifics, and I already have, because I forgot to take it off, a little sneak peek. So if you're watching, you already know who we're going to talk about first. But I'm going to take it off just here for a second so I can ask you guys before we get into it, how are you guys doing, and how has this draft process been for you guys? I know it's probably a lot more fun digging into this class than it was the 2024 class.
Yeah, in terms of upside swings, it's really, really interesting past pick 2, honestly. So, after Dylan Harper, there is that next tier where it's either VJ, Trey Johnson, or Ace. Once you get to pick 6, it's pretty flat up until the end of the late lottery. So, this draft process has really tested the limits for both myself and Andrew, and identifying those gems, that you really want to hit, because it's relatively flat once you start at pick 6. So very interesting.
Agreed with Mitch. It has been a lengthy process. So, it's almost been like, even though this draft class is more stacked than like last year, it has been more difficult for us to kind of put big boards together and think about mock drafts this year. And there's a few reasons for that. It kind of just seems like Mitch said, like once you get past 2, and especially once you get past 6, it kind of seems like a lot of the same thing. And it's almost like, user's preference at that point. So that's what makes it a little bit tough. And obviously we're going to know so much more once the actual draft happens, when we know what guys' landing spots are. But either way, stoked to be here. Brought some backup today, Noah. So this is going to be a good one.
Absolutely. I'm excited to dive into a number of these players because some of them are guys I said it during my intro, so everybody's already heard this, but I'm gonna say it to you guys while you guys are here, that you guys always do a good job of finding players that I haven't researched enough and making me say, okay, I definitely need to do my homework before we do an episode with them. So I appreciate you guys for making me do that, because I will get lazy if I don't. Not the first player we're going to talk about. He doesn't fit that same, I guess, fit, mold, model, whatever word. There's probably better words out there for that. But first player we're going to talk about is Cedric Coward, who I think is we were talking about this, I guess, before, that there's like some players where you'll see them projected either in the lottery or in the early 20s. And then you'll see in other mocks that they're projected to go like in the 40s. And I think he is a pretty polarizing prospect in that regard, in the sense that he only played a handful of games this past season, but obviously has looked good in workouts, transferred to Duke and then decided, no, I'm actually going to get drafted early enough for me to go to the NBA instead of just enjoying the NIL money at Duke. So there is a lot of people that are very high on him. And I think, Mitch, he was on your list. So I want to start with you to kind of get your thoughts on him as a prospect.
Yeah, so when you see Cedric Coward, you kind of think of him as one of those exciting prospects that you haven't heard of coming into the draft process, coming from a small school. And yes, it would have been nice to see him play at Duke in the ACC with higher level of competition, but coming from Division III, moving his way up to Eastern Washington, and then recently Washington State the past couple of years, you've seen the consistency, even though he has been, leveling up that competition. He's been an uber efficient 3-point shooter, over 40%, over the last 4 or so years. He's always shot over 50% from the field. He has some underrated post game as well. And he gets you those points, rebounds, and some of those out of position assists that you'd like to see. And when you think of Cedric Coward, you see that gravitation towards that J-Dub comparison, right? Someone who in the start of the pre-draft process was mocked in at the 40s, but because of the combine, because of the interviews and the maturity, being one of the higher level 3-and-D prospects, you tend to see him even go as high as the lottery, even the mid lottery. In KOC's draft guide on Yahoo, he's number 5 on his big board, and for good reason. So Noah, like, a thing for me that I've noticed in this pre-draft process, a lot of the risers are those who are in that 3-and-D mold. So you think of not only Cedric Coward, you think of Carter Bryant from Arizona and Drake Powell from UNC, some guys who flashed really efficient 3-point shooting numbers, and who have that defensive potential because of their physical profile. And Cedric Coward is the most interesting one out of the 3, in my opinion, from a fantasy perspective, because we saw that production. It's not as much theoretical as those other 2, which makes me believe a little bit more in that transition to the NBA. So my question for you, Noah, I know he's one of the more polarizing prospects, but when you think of Cedric Coward, do you see him as someone that you can see possibly reaching for in the later end of the lottery, maybe even the mid lottery?
I think it's going to end up just depending on the team. And I think that there are a number of teams that will probably have that conversation. There's no insider information there, but based on what he showed in the limited sample size this past season, and then also the fact that he was going to transfer to Duke, look good in workouts, things like that, that has a lot of teams very excited about him. I think it's hard to say. I think it'll also be a nice factor to see where he goes as far as how we'll value him in dynasty leagues, because if he does end up creeping into the lottery or just outside the lottery, then it's like, oh, okay, like these teams want to invest a much earlier pick than I was necessarily expecting them to. But then if he goes in the late first, then, is it to a team that he is going to play a lot early on, or is it a team that he's going to be more of a depth piece? So we'll see. I think just thinking about the couple teams at the end of the lottery, I don't know if I would do that if I were Chicago or Atlanta. And I think for San Antonio, that might be where he's first considered in my mind. Maybe there's other teams that really like him that I'm just would obviously have no idea about, because if they already have gotten Dylan Harper and now it's like, okay, like maybe they can take a swing on a player that they just want to make sure that they're able to get. So I could see San Antonio or OKC there just adding to the to their depth there, adding to their treasure chest of depth. I could see those both as options. What are your thoughts on Coward, Andrew?
I like him too. The 6-game sample size, of course, is a little bit concerning, but like when you look at the stat set itself and the fact that he did participate at the combine and do well, at least I'm pretty sure that he did. Mitch, did you confirm that he went to the combine?
He did. He did go to the combine, and
okay,
he did
good.
with some pretty good physical measurements and
all right,
speed.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's obviously what's most important here is that he did show up to the combine, because there's some that didn't, like due to injuries, because he missed a lot of time last year. And for example, Thomas Sorber got hurt last year and missed the combine. So at least Coward did go to the combine, and that's, like the combine is just so often where there's guys you've never heard of, one of which we will also talk about today, that, pop up out of nowhere, not just because of the physical measurements, but because they play really well in the scrimmages too. So the fact that Coward has been in front of the eyes of NBA personnel now, even after just such a short sample size, and there is so much interest in him, is definitely a good sign. It calms a lot of the fears about, this was such a small sample size, but he was an upperclassman. So there is a lot of NCAA history to go on with him. And then, of course, that he was at the least present at the combine, and scouts were impressed. So, I do like Coward as well.
Something to point out about Coward, too, he did have a 38.5-inch vertical. So he's pretty sneaky athletic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to also add in the 7'2" wingspan. That's not bad for a wing shooter. And so you can talk about all those, like he's a guy hitting threes with a 38-inch vertical with a 7'2" wingspan. Like, I think that projects pretty well to contribute at an NBA level. We'll see. But I definitely think there'll be some teams enticed by that.
And especially from, a fantasy manager perspective as well, in dynasty leagues, his steal and block rates are insane. I believe he posted a 5.4% block rate. That's only like 1% less than Kaman Maluach, one of the top centers and rim protectors. Not to say, Cedric's going to translate, but he does have that potential where he gives you those sneaky blocks on a day-to-day or a game-to-game basis.
Yep. And we will segue into our next player, who's a player who we're pretty confident is going to go a good bit earlier than Cedric Coward, and that's Kon Knueppel from Duke, who Andrew's excited about. I'm ready. This is your guy. But no, he's a player that I think, I don't know, he just does so many different things well. And I think if you just look at the numbers, you could probably say, like he's a really good shooter, like cool. But I think if you actually watch him, like there's a lot more offensive upside there than him just being an off-ball shooter. I think he can do stuff with the ball in his hands. He can create his own shot. He plays really smart, competes on defense. I think wherever he ends up going, he's going to be a significant part of that team's future. If it is a team like a Utah Jazz at number 5, maybe he's not their franchise player. Maybe he's not the guy moving forward, but he's going to be one of their starters when that team is back in the playoffs, no matter how many years it takes. I think Knueppel's that type of player. Andrew, what do you like about this guy?
So as you guys were alluding to when we were talking about Coward, that mid to late lottery, it is becoming like a little bit of a mystery box, some like 6 to 14 range. And there is just like so much inherent risk. Like, do you want to deal with Maluach being so raw? Do you want to take a flyer on Trey Johnson and hope that his defense holds up and that he doesn't, his offense is going to be there, but the worry is that his defense can make him somewhat of a liability to commit to long-term. Like Mitchell pointed this out to me the other day, Benedict Mathurin has times where he's not on the floor because he's getting exposed a little bit in this playoff environment. And so it makes teams a little bit hesitant to commit long-term. Like they've committed long-term to Nembhard, but not Mathurin, who they got in the top 10. So it's like there's that type of risk with a Trey Johnson. Do you want to deal with Derek Queen figuring it out? So let's present to you probably what I deem to be the safest option in this range, and that is Kon Knueppel. At the minimum, he is going to be a 7th or 8th rotation player in the NBA at the bare minimum. I really do not see a bust possibility with Kon, like a possibility where he's just 100% out of a rotation. He's like a Jet Howard type thing. Like I don't see that whatsoever. So that's kind of what I think he represents to me, is the biggest safety valve to go with in that mid to late lottery. Like if you're totally undecided and maybe you do want to take an upside swing, and that's fine, but maybe you're a competing dynasty team and you need someone that's for sure going to be a hit, then this is your guy. So like some comparisons to think of. Maybe you guys have seen this meme before. The meme that's somebody's in like a Bevmo or a Total Wine, and it's a picture of the wine section, and it says "exciting whites." So let's go through a few of those. We got Bogdan Bogdanovic. So he's got both of the Bogs. Wally Zerbiak and Joe Ingles 2.0. So those tertiary offensive creators. They can play make. They're not, complete liabilities on defense. Cam Johnson is another good comparison too. He's just, Cam's just a little bit bigger. But if you think about all those guys I just mentioned, all those guys entered the NBA like a little bit later on, like 24-ish or older. So I'm comparing him to someone like he just already feels like a veteran is kind of what I'm trying to say here. So often with these elite shooters, like these 40 plus percent 3-point shooters, they'll have that small Jace Richardson frame, a little undersized, 6'2", 185, something like that. But Kon is 6'6", over 200 pounds. So he has like that downhill athlete type of body, but he's an elite shooter, 40% from three, over 90% from the line. He was 2% away on his field goals from the 50-40-90 club. And that's playing in a high-level environment for Duke too. So this is just like a borderline guaranteed 10-plus year NBA career. Great off-ball movement, great basketball IQ. He's very effective actually in running the pick and roll too. So just, that perfect tertiary or even secondary scoring option. I think there is that ceiling to be a secondary option scoring wise. But, a lot of those guys I named, both of the Bogdanoviches, Cam Johnson, they're more of like a third option, which is still great, especially for us in fantasy. So the real weakness, it's kind of hard to find like a glaring one. You almost have to get nitpicky. Like, yes, I can mention blocks and rebounds, but that's not necessarily what Kon's job is. I guess the number one thing you can identify is he does not shoot well off the dribble. So this limits the ability to be like a primary creator. Again, not necessarily what his job is supposed to be, but that is something that you would want to get better. And the athleticism is lacking a bit too. Like he can be prone to blow-bys, but I think he might be almost a little bit more guarded within an NBA defense where he has, long athletic teammates around him that can kind of bail him out. But maybe for his rookie year, or the first 2 years, I can see defenses trying to target him a little bit. But really, that's it risk-wise. There's not like I think with a Malawak and a Queen and a Murray Boyles, there are bust risks for all three of them. Not like massive bust risks, but it's there. And I don't see a bust risk. This guy's completely useless in 4 years with Kon. He's going to be at worst just like a rotation player, but pretty likely here, especially with the IQ and his hustle plays. He's just a winner. He's a serial winner. He's a Wisconsin State champion. He had a pretty good season at Duke as well too. Just a great name to have. I like I like Kon Knueppel quite a bit.
Yeah, no, there is definitely a lot to like about him. And pretty much every rookie is probably going to get targeted a good bit their first year or two as they get adjusted to the NBA level, aside from the top defensive prospects that are getting drafted because of how good they are on that end. But Mitch, what are kind of your feelings and thoughts on Kon?
Yeah, with Kon, going into the college season, Gavoni was hyping this kid up a lot. People were skeptical. Like he wasn't that traditional 5-star recruit. But ever since he kind of transitioned into the college game, he got his footing in his shooting started to translate. He had a little bit of a rough start. He ended up being one of probably their second best player at times. And I like to credit Kaman's rise in the draft process due to Kon because of all those open looks that were created from the attention that Kon caused because he's such a threat on the offensive end. Going through that March Madness run, he had that hidden playmaking. What I've seen is those lobs to Kaman Malawach. It was very frequent and noticeable. And when I think of a higher end outcome, I think of someone like a Desmond Bane, right? Someone with some sneaky assists, someone who's uber efficient. He's probably going to drop you 20 points per game any given night, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and maybe a steal. What is that, like a top 30, top 40 player in his prime? If Kon hits that 90th percentile outcome in a Desmond Bane, where he's a connective piece, he can play that secondary creator role on a playoff team, then why not take Kon Knueppel at, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 if he's your guy? Just because, like Andrew said, all those other guys in those range from a fantasy rookie draft perspective have so many questions. But with Kon, you're getting not only a safe floor player, but a guy with a higher end outcome like a Desmond Bane. So those are just a little bit of my 2 cents on Kon. I'm very high on him as well, just like you, Andrew.
I like that with Bane because Bane's not an insane athlete and he's not like, a 7-foot wingspan type of guy either. And he's still able to produce those types of numbers. So I like that.
Yeah. And I think pretty much with every team, whether it's a rebuilding team or a more of a win now-ish team that ends up with him, I think he'll be able to contribute and produce from day one, basically. The next player I want to talk about, not really sure where he's going to end up going, but I think when you look at the numbers, one thing jumps out immediately, and that's the passing stats. And I'm talking about the guy who I'm watching his brother right now on TV in the NBA Finals. The player we're going to talk about is Ryan Nembhard. Mitch, this is your guy. Talk to me a little bit about what you like about him.
Yeah, so not only does he come from an NBA bloodline, he's not Andrew Nembhard. Andrew Nembhard is 4 to 5 inches taller. Ryan is that traditional point guard. He's smaller than his brother. He's lighter than his brother. He doesn't have the same defensive impact as his brother, but there's still a lot of things to be really excited for, especially when I look at those players in that early to mid second round range from a fantasy basketball draft. Some of his strengths really include high IQ and awareness. I recently watched a film review with him and some other draft analysts, and he studies the game a lot, and it shows in his answers. So, and he knows his physical deficiencies. Being a smaller player, knowing he's likely going to be targeted on the defensive end. So who does he study? Jose Alvarado. He also studies TJ McConnell, who's on the Pacers playing right now. And offensively, he tries to be and create his craft just like Fred VanVleet, someone who thrives on the mid-range and the pick and roll, and also like a prime Kyle Lowry, who was one of the best pick and roll initiators back in his day in Toronto. And, over the last 10 seasons of college basketball, there's really only one player, and this is probably Noah's favorite player right now in the Atlanta Hawks, that has similar assist numbers and assist rate. Ryan Nembhard had an assist rate of 42%, I believe, in college, which is absolutely insane. And when we think of someone like one of the best passers in this class, like Igor Dimin, he's like 5 or almost 10% higher than him. Obviously, Ryan's not going to have the same keys to the offense like he did in college, but you see that upside if given that opportunity. And we see the progress of his three-point shot. His first 2 years in Creighton, and then his last year in Gonzaga, he was like a sub 35% shooter. This year, he shot over 40%. Some may say it could be an outlier, but when you really listen to his pre-draft interviews, he talked about his change in his form, where his release point was a little bit higher, and that adjustment period really happened after his junior season. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that the three-point threat and progression is in fact real. Last point that I'd like to make on Ryan Nembhard, some of the smaller guards from previous drafts that often get overlooked and are seen to be undersized and lack the athleticism of some of the top-end prospects. Some of the ones from previous years include Deuce McBride, Emmanuel Quickly, Peyton Pritchard, all guys who can make a real impact for winning teams, as we've seen for the Knicks, for both McBride and IQ. and also for the Boston Celtics for Pritchard. Some guys that were definitely overlooked for being sub 6 feet tall. Ryan Nembhard kind of fits in that same mold. He's not necessarily the same scorer, but he's a great passer and he has some really, really high IQ and vision. So when it comes to taking those risks at the second round, Ryan Nembhard is my guy.
Yeah, I think if you're just looking at from a fantasy perspective, there's a number of players that have gone in the second round of drafts. I guess it's hard to find. I guess more of this is what I'm trying to say. It's hard to find players that have had this much success as passers entering the NBA draft. I mean, we literally saw Elfrid Payton sign like a 10-day in New Orleans last year and have some crazy assist games. And he was a rosterable player in standard redraft leagues because it's hard to find players that can get assists at this rate. So if you're wanting to take a chance on somebody in the second round of a 30-team dynasty draft or the later rounds of a smaller league where the numbers even out the same, a player that's already shown that he can pass and be efficient like this and run an offense, I think there's going to be teams in the second round that would be happy to add this guy and say, hey, like bare minimum, if we need you to come in and play 10 or 15 minutes a game, we trust you. And maybe a higher end outcome than that is a backup point guard role and then sometimes a streaming in as a starter. And maybe there is higher end outcomes other than that as well. But we've seen him do it. We've seen him put up some really strong numbers. Andrew, how do you kind of feel about Ryan Nembhard?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that second rounder, under 6 feet tall, not a great 3-point shooter, but the guy that you trust to keep the ship running smoothly when all the big dogs are sitting. Like, I'm pretty much seeing another Trey Jones here, who is still, you know, within the NBA, was drafted in the second round, and still is carving out a pretty good career for himself. And Noah, I participate in that free NCAA redraft league with you. Not only is it just fun to do, like we don't play for money or anything, but it also kind of forces you to keep your eyes on some random prospects. And I had Nembhard on my team all year, and I had him on my team because his 9-category value, at least at Gonzaga, was insane. That 10 assists per game is like almost impossible to find within the NCAA environment for someone who's going to be that useful to you in a 9-category setting too. So, you know, so that's pretty much one of the main reasons why I've been aware of him for the most of the year, is because I had to kind of keep tabs on him for my team. And I had that thought because, like, I didn't really see him mocked in the second round yet, but he's probably benefiting from a lot of the guys from like that 30 to 45-ish range choosing to go back to school. And so those guys who were kind of outside of 60 shifted upwards. So now he's probably going to get drafted because there's, you know, so many guys that decided to go back to school. But he should be in the NBA anyways. I really do think that.
Last point on Ryan before we move on. Andrew, you kind of reminded me of some of those guys talking about like the NIL deals and whatnot. He started in the G League elite camp in the pre-draft process. So he was a fringe guy to start, you know, to be drafted and whatnot. But he was one of the 5 standouts who actually got invited to the NBA Combine to get measured and, you know, have his physicals tested and whatnot. So he's trending in the right direction. And I'm pretty confident he's going to be drafted. Where I'll draft him in fantasy is probably going to be a little bit higher than his real life projection, just because of that stat set.
Yeah, for sure. We'd love to get some of those, that level of assist production late in the second round of our drafts. We're going to move on to talking about a handful of big men. A couple of pretty exciting prospects, I think, for fantasy, but also just for teams that might be looking to get some of these guys potentially in the later part of the first round, potentially into the second round. We have really no clue where some of these guys are going to end up going. Just for the fact that I can find him the quickest. I think we're going to talk about a player. This is the one player that prior to me asking for your list, I hadn't done much research on. So you guys are going to have to correct me if I get his name wrong. Not that I'm great with the other names anyway, but Yannik Konan Neerhouser. Is that correct? Or Neerhouser?
It's probably Neerhouser, I think, but I'm not 100% sure on that too. He is Swiss, so I think it is Neerhouser. But yes, so this is one of those like big combine winners and it was at the detriment to Mitchell and I, because as part of our channel, we do vlogs where we will go watch NCAA games in person, and we will scout a specific process or a specific prospect. So like we did that with like Isaiah Collier, Ron Holland, and AJ Mitchell last year. And Mitch, due to his job, gets free tickets every once in a while to USC men's basketball games. And we went to USC versus Penn State. But this is obviously so far in front of the combine where this is where this guy emerged from. We had no idea that we were sitting in front of somebody who's now considered within the top 40. So like we watched him. He played 12 minutes that night. He had a couple of blocks, and it kind of just flew right by us because he wasn't being talked about yet. But the combine is where that came from. And it's because he placed first in half. So 4 out of 8 of the measurements events for center specifically. So he's first among centers in max vertical leap, first among centers in standing vertical leap, first in shuttle run, and first in the 3/4 sprint. So this is the typical insane athlete rim running center. This draft has a lot of the playmaking bigs, the offensive hub bigs, your Raynauds, your Danny Wolfs, maybe even your Hansen Yangs, Sorber, Derek Queen, like a lot of those guys. Like the real rim runners is basically Malawak, and then it takes a while to get to the next one, which is Neerhouser. And just like Mitch was talking about with Nembhard, the second round, especially once you get later into the second round, it's really good to try to stick to those guys who are specialists at a category that is hard to find within 9 categories. So for our example with Mitch's last guy, assists, he knows that he can target Ryan Nembhard in the second round as a most likely a surefire source of assists. Think of Neerhouser as that, but for blocks specifically. I can't make any promises that he'll be an offensive, engine, or he's going to rip down 11 rebounds a game, but this dude is a shot blocker. So like, so comparisons, he could be like a Daniel Gafford, a DeAndre Jordan. There's some wild outcomes with second rounders, so maybe he's going to be more like a Jackson Hayes, but top 15 in the nation in blocks per game, even though he didn't really play a super heavy amount. Like I said, the game that Mitch and I went to, he only played about 12 minutes, but you could just expect at the least good field goal percentage and blocks out of this guy. And he got 2 blocks in each of the scrimmage games that he played in the combine as well. So he is a surefire source of blocks. And there's just, potential to, because he is like very skinny. So he does need to put on weight so he doesn't get bullied by bigs. And, you have to look at him as a traditional rim runner. So don't expect the passing to become as part of his game, like as an offensive hub. Don't expect him to start shooting threes. He only shot 66% from the free throw line. So that's not really what we're looking at. It's just the traditional big stats, field goals, rebounds, and definitely going to be some blocks coming from him.
Yeah, I actually saw a really good thread on him earlier, and I was like, I definitely need to watch this before this podcast tonight. But it's from @KJ, I think __hoops. Just kind of went through a number of things he does well, and obviously the blocks and the vertical are highlighted, but he actually shot a high percentage at the rim as well. It was like I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like that he shot a high percentage on hook shots at the rim, so he's got a little bit of an offensive game down low and did a little bit off the dribble as well. And I was looking it up as you were talking. And the game that you guys went to, it looks like he got into a good bit of foul trouble and only played 12 minutes. But the games after that, he actually had a double-double, 19 points, 24 points. So it was just, I guess, bad luck that you guys went to the one game.
Yeah, USC blew him out, too. They won by like 20 or 30. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Nice. Well, Mitch, what do you think about Yannik, Konan, Neerhouser? And when the NBA drops a pronunciation guide, we will get that perfect 100%.
I'm calling him Yannik just because I don't want to butcher his last name at this point.
YKN.
Yeah, YKN. So YKN, fun bet to me. I talked to Andrew, like I'm either drafting a big man or a point guard. If you look at my draft history, Andrew, that's traditionally the way I go in the second round. And it's because, these specialists, if they're drafted to a bad team or whatnot, they're going to get that opportunity. You look at Adam Bona from UCLA on the Philadelphia 76ers, similar profile for fantasy as Yannik. And he was one of the late, risers who flashed that top 100 upside because of those blocks and because of the good hands, similar to Yannik having, good touch around the rim and whatnot. So, he's a potential guy that can be and have that trajectory as like a Daniel Gafford, who at some point in his career was arguably a top 100 dynasty asset. And if you can grab someone like that in the mid to early second round, why not? Most likely you're not going to hit on those picks anyways. So why not draft someone who has high upside versus someone who's just like a 3-and-D guy? You don't want to draft like another Tony Snell who will stay in the league for like 6 or 8 years, but probably won't provide any exciting upside at any point of their career. But Yannik has that chance to be a real asset, and that's a swing I believe is worth taking.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously the stat set does translate pretty well for fantasy basketball, and we'll see where he lands on draft night and see if that ends up being a pretty good indicator as well of how much he'll be able to play in year one and beyond that. We'll move on to talking about another center, probably one of the best, if not the best. It's a debate. I would say one of the best passing bigs in this draft class. That's Hansen Yang, who's another guy that Andrew has introduced me to and that you guys have introduced me to. So thank you guys again for that. But talk to me a little bit. I'll start with you, Mitch. If you can talk to me a little bit about him as a prospect and what gets you excited about him, unless you're not high on him, in which case tell me why you hate him.
Oh no, I'm definitely high on Hansen Yang. I mean, we were first introduced to him in the American scene last year in the California Classic in Summer League. I believe he played against the Sacramento Kings and the Charlotte Hornets, I believe, with the Chinese national team. And he possessed some really exciting footwork. You kind of see the little Hakeem Dream shake a little bit. The passing is really exciting. And he gets that comparison as, the Chinese Jokic, right? He does a little bit of everything. But the main concern is, the level of competition. As many of us know, not only us, but the entire fantasy community. In the CBA, you got Stephon Marbury averaging like 40 points a game. So like you have to take the stats with a grain of salt. And he is, yes, very exciting, but there's a lot of questions. Especially if he can stay on the floor at the NBA level. He has a great body type. I've shared some of the pictures with Andrew that he's shredded, but on the actual floor in those scrimmages or whatnot, he often gets played off the floor because he doesn't have that level of conditioning that he needs. But he is going to get that NBA level training and strength and conditioning programs here in the NBA. So there is reason to believe, yes, that he'll be able to transition and get that health and fitness where he needs to be. You look at the numbers, 16 points a game in China, 10 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and 2.7 blocks. He's the definition of a swing and trying to make a home run at the end of the first round. And I think, Noah, you're in the Debbie League with me. I totally regret passing up on Hansen Yang when I had the chance. I was going back and forth with Andrew, like, oh, should I take Caravan? Caravan's being mocked in the 20s, maybe even in the teens, early into the year when we did our startup draft on no ceilings. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll be safe here. I already took a risk with Rocco Zerkowski. I already have a big man, from that draft. But it's like Caravan just is the traditional white American guy who wants to play all 4 years and, be the superstar, get the NIL money. And I don't blame him. UConn's a great program. But it gives me such regret that I passed on someone who has such high upside like a Hansen Yang, especially when you look at that stat set. A little bit of resentment there, but I'm fully on board now. And I'm learning from my mistakes.
Love to hear that. Andrew, tell me a little bit about what you like about Hansen Yang.
Yeah, so this is fun because in the, we're kind of revisiting a couple of guys that you and I talked about when we did a pod together recently. And if you remember when you pulled him up on Fanspo, his rank was like 62. So I was telling you, I was like, okay, outside of 60, so he might not even get drafted. But now, granted, this is a different site, Data Baller, but now he's at 36, and that's obviously from the combine. So he's able to get in front of NBA scouts, and we got to see what he could do, at least around the other competition that were in the scrimmages at the combine, because they could probably be better than what he's facing in China. So like in game 1, 12 points, he had a couple assists and 1 block. He only had 1 rebound, oddly, which is a little bit weird. But in game 2, 11 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 blocks. That's awesome. So I don't like unlike Neerhouser, I'm not going to say that this guy's going to be a block source. I look at him as more of like an offensive bruiser. Think about like a Valanciunas. But yeah, this is just one of those swings. Like once you get past because like I mentioned, like a lot of those guys that were supposed to go 30 to 45 went back to school. So once you're past like 25, you're at like 27, something like that. And you want to take a swing on a big man, because obviously big men always have such a rich source of stats for 9 category. This is one of those swings that you can take. You can go for somebody like this as opposed to just another Terrence Shannon I was about to say Baylor Shireman, but he might have a better role now that Tatum's hurt. But you kind of get what I'm saying. So like, if you want more of that upside swing, that's what this guy is. And just the progression of probably not getting drafted, like lots of big boards had him 50, 60 outwards to now the outskirts of the first round. Like scouts are noticing this. So, why wouldn't we within a dynasty setting? There's plenty of guys that are going to be in the G League all year and offer not much more than what Cam Reddish offers to the Lakers when he was on the Lakers, like in their careers. Why not take one of these swings on somebody who could just end up, you're spending a really late first round pick or early second round pick, and you get a Jonas Valanciunas out of that. That's excellent value in a deep league dynasty.
100%. For what it's worth, he's now 48th on Fanspo, so it seems like multiple sites are in on him at least being drafted, and we'll see what the landing spot ends up being.
Yeah, that's important for sure.
Yeah, and we'll move on to talking about the last prospect that I have, or that we have. I just need to find him. Okay, here he is. Another center that we're revisiting from the last time we talked to Andrew, and that's Maxime Raynaud, who you were very high on, and then now, since you introduced me to him then, and now I've seen so many more people very high on him, talking about him potentially going in like the lottery or in the 20s. Don't think that it ends up happening that he creeps into the lottery, but a team could definitely take him in the early to late 20s, definitely a first round, potentially a first round pick here. But what gets you really excited about him as a player?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the main things I said to you in that last pod was like, do not be shocked at all if post combine Maxime Raynaud is talked about a lot more. And that's exactly what happened. And I messaged you pretty much immediately afterwards, after the combine, when people were really hyped on him. And I was like, aha, I knew it was going to be him. So let's talk about why they were hyped. The game that he played in, 24 minutes, 20 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists. He made 2 3-pointers and went 4 for 4 from the line. Elite fantasy line, or 9 category line right there. And then, talk about some of the measurables. First in lane agility. This is among centers. Second in the 3-quarter sprint. Third in the standing vertical leap. So it's not like he's some, bum athlete. He's just a big guy. He can move actually pretty well. And so I kind of came up with like a 3-scaled range of outcomes for him. A higher ranged outcome would be like a Brook Lopez. Maybe middle range, if the defense doesn't get a little bit better, is like a Mo Wagner, kind of just like an offensive spark plug coming in off the bench. He can do a little bit of like maybe, blocking as a roamer, but he's not a rim deterrent like a Zach Edey is, or, Nicholas Claxton is, or something like that. And then the lower end, like the floor, is maybe like a Luke Cornett. But I think it does still look to be closer to that Brook Lopez. And I'm not just saying that just because Brook went to Stanford. He's a drop coverage big. He has the feel. He can shoot. I think he's the only big in here that averaged 20 points per game in this draft class. And, like each step, like each year at Stanford, he took a massive step forward in his game. And like I mentioned to you, he probably should have been brought to Paris on the French Olympic team. He was like one of the last 2 guys on the bubble that didn't end up getting brought. But with that being said, Kevin O'Connor has him ranked as high as 14. So there's just such a wild range of outcomes with Raynaud still. Like that's kind of the range I see is lottery, like late lottery, to 40, which is obviously a huge swing here. But I think that'll settle down once we see where he actually gets drafted. One of those possibilities, Noah, like I alluded to this earlier off camera, but one trending topic on NBA Twitter is, like, for some reason I actually get a weird amount of Hawks content. I don't really know why, but there's a lot of Hawks fans that want him at 22 for you guys. How do you feel about that?
I'd be very happy with that. I think the fact that Kon Knueppel is a free agent, Larry Nance Jr. I believe is also a free agent. Right now there isn't a true backup center on the team, and I think with 2 first-round picks, he is one of the players that I'd be happy taking at 22, depending on who else is there. Like, I wouldn't hate a Thomas Sorber, but I'm assuming he's going to go after 13 and before 22. I would actually prefer that, obviously. But taking him at 22, I'd be pretty happy with. I think he makes a lot of sense in Atlanta as a floor spacing big. Would probably get a good bit of open looks with Trae Young there. So, no, I would be very happy with that. I think even though some people may consider him a second-round prospect, I think the Hawks don't have a second-round pick. So you kind of got to take him when you can. So
Exactly. And like, if he goes to Atlanta, he should probably shoot up dynasty big boards even more, just because that second big spot is currently vacant right now. So that's a landing spot that, you know, you should be absolutely excited about, dynasty managers, if you see him go there.
Yeah. Mitch, what do you kind of think about right now?
I mean, everything Andrew said, he hit the nail on the coffin. That's his guy. And I don't know more than Andrew on this part, so I'm just going to let him finish that segment.
No, we're good now. I won't filibuster this one like I did with a previous prospect. So we spread it out to 2 videos and instead of one large segment. So that's we're coming in more efficient this year.
Well, if the Hawks do take him at 22, I'll have you back on and we'll do an hour-long episode on how he fits, just so you can get it all out. One last question for you guys, just because this is, you know, I've had a couple other people on, and we'll have more on to talk just about the draft specifically, but you guys are also dynasty analysts, so we're talking about that fantasy element in there. Dynasty startup draft. How early are you guys taking Cooper Flagg? In a dynasty startup? Is he a top 5 guy? Is he a top 10 guy? And knowing that he's in Dallas, is that a factor for you guys at all? And Mitch, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. So we just finished our June ranks. We finalized it a bit. We released a podcast, and we have Cooper Flagg pretty comfortably in our top 10. I believe I'm the highest on him at 7, or Andrew, you might be. And I think there's a true conversation to be had about Cooper Flagg after that Cade Cunningham spot at 5. He can, for me personally, I could see Cooper Flagg as high as 6 after that tier of, Wemby, Jokic, Shea, Luka, and then Cade at 5. I think really solidified that, just because we know he's a winning player now. He's not just putting up open stats on a bad team. Then Tatum fell out of our top 5. He's around like the 15th spot. Given the Achilles, there's a lot of ambiguity there on the recovery with such a big injury. So Cooper Flagg kind of he's the youngest player going into the NBA. That's for one. Everyone in Dynasty loves the young, bright and shiny toy. That's going to be Cooper Flagg. He has an incredible stat set. He gives you points, he gives you rebounds, he gives you assists out of position. And also he has pretty good steal and block rate, similar to maybe a Scotty Barnes or so. But he's also putting up good efficiency stats as well. So when I think of Cooper Flagg, I think of a similar stat set to a Tatum and maybe a cleaner Paolo Banchero. And I think that's a potential top 5 dynasty asset. But for now, he's on that 6-7 range for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Andrew, where do you have Matt? And then I'll give my thoughts on it.
Probably also that 6-7 range. I think we should be solidified with Cade at 5. Obviously that spot was previously held by Tatum. And then Cade was at 6. So with Tatum out of the picture, it obviously does move Cooper up a spot. And then the other guys in his rank is like Halliburton, Trae Young, LaMelo, like those types of guys. So the one thing that makes me lean towards taking Cooper right after 5 and at 6 is because his trade value within a dynasty setting is still really high. So I'm trying to go look it up right here, but I know he was traded, I believe, a couple of times within our league, the Angle Dynasty League, and he's had some pretty big returns so far. Okay, so yeah, so one of our teams sent away basically the draft rights to him and got back Tyrese Halliburton, pick 14, and a future draft pick for Cooper, Drew Holiday, and Luke Cornett, basically. So he's going for pretty high returns. Like if let's say you missed out on getting Shea or Luka or one of those guys, maybe you grab Cooper after that and try to add to him to then upgrade something along those lines, or you use Cooper to get some depth. So you'll say, okay, maybe I'm not fully on board with Cooper, so I'll use him to get Halliburton plus a little bit more. So that's kind of another reason why you should probably take him like right after 5 is that trade value, especially in this pre-draft, like before we even see him in summer league or just on the court in general. That perceived value is so high right now. Like you could do a whole number of things trade-wise within a dynasty league using him.
Andrew, do you want to share my trade where I use Cooper as one of the main chips?
Yes. So, like I said, you can add to him to try to upgrade. Mitchell, let's pull it up right here, used Cooper, Amen Thompson, and Matas Buzelis to upgrade to Wembanyama.
That's a nuts trade.
Yeah, it broke the league that night. It might have broke Fantrax because we couldn't access Fantrax for like the next 5 or so hours. But yes, Cooper is an amazing prospect, and when you have the opportunity to possibly use him as a trade chip for potentially the best fantasy basketball contributor of all time, like think Hakeem Olajuwon with 3-point shooting, you do it. As much as I love Cooper Flagg. So yeah, he can be used to upgrade to that higher upper echelon talent, like a Victor Wembanyama as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty insane trade. I think if I'm actually doing a dynasty startup, I think I'd consider him at 5. I think that I couldn't justify taking him over Wemby, SGA, Jokic, and Luka. But I think that there's enough upside there and the trade value you guys just mentioned for me to take him at 5. I just think that it needs to be a conversation because you could think, 1, the trade value, but 2, at this time next year, where does he rank in a dynasty league? Does he go at 5, or do you guys think that he would go lower than that? Or do you think there's a chance that he's just so good as a rookie and everyone sees the future there that it's like, oh, no, we're taking him just number 2, like it's Wemby and then Cooper Flagg because he was just that good as a rookie. I think there's a chance that happens. So I'm like, I'd pretty happily take him at 5 in a real draft. Now, I think if you're doing a dynasty ranking, then there's a number of factors, such as the fact that he hasn't played an NBA game yet, and maybe he's just not as good as it seems like he is. And then maybe you would rank like Cade Cunningham or a couple of other players in that range over him. But I think if you're doing an actual startup draft, you start talking about him at number 5.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for this episode. I appreciate you guys hopping on with me. Before I let you guys go, is there any content that you guys have coming out soon? I know there's only 2 weeks until the draft, so I'm sure things are busy for you guys, but anything that everyone needs to be checking out?
Yeah, so obviously we're going to be really pumping some stuff out as we head into the rookie draft. Mitch and I, June is a very busy month for he and I because we partner together on all the rookie content that we do. So all of our content, you can just find it in one place at our website, angledfantasybasketball.wordpress.com. Everything that you need is in there. We just started a Patreon recently too with additional bonus content and access to more ranks. So you can find the link to that within our website as well too. Head there to see everything that we have.
Perfect. Well, you guys can give them a follow on Twitter at anglefantasybb, as I said at the beginning. And anything you missed from what Andrew just said, I'm sure that they will tweet out, so you can definitely find it there as well. But thank you guys so much for hopping on with me.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will definitely have you guys back. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. And I'll see you guys next time.